In 2021, The Nature of Middle-earth was released, containing some of Tolkien's later notes and writings that had never seen the light of day. One single page, dated the 19th of January 1970, contained the reasoning behind why it took Sauron almost 100 years to attack the elves after his disguise had been uncovered. While the entire page is a treasure trove of interesting stuff, in particular, it brings to light a never-before-seen part of Tolkien's lore, the idea of powerful Eastern Orcs who bent the knee to neither Morgoth or Sauron. As I said, there was a question raised by Tolkien's chronology of the Second Age. In the year 1600, Sauron forges the One Ring, and owing to their own creation of the Three, the elves become aware of his betrayal. The mask is off. They now know that Annatar, the Lord of Gifts, was Sauron. Sauron demands the rings be handed over to him, the elves refuse, negotiations break down, and war becomes inevitable. But interestingly enough, Sauron doesn't attack until 93 years later, the question obviously being, why did it take so long for the war to actually start? Tolkien's note on this subject is called Note on the Delay of Gil-galad and the Númenóreans, because interestingly enough, Tolkien is actually answering why the elves and the Númenóreans didn't immediately attack Sauron. He answers this by saying that neither party actually knew how powerful Sauron was at this point, because Sauron had done an excellent job of keeping his activity a secret. And funnily enough, Sauron was actually incredibly weak at this point. As Annatar, he was posing as a friend, and any concentration of force, even in Mordor, which was near to Númenórean settlements along the coast of Gondor, would have been noticed. So when Sauron's plan with the Rings of Power failed, he was kind of back at square one. He now needed to subjugate or destroy the elves by force, but he didn't really have an army. His emissaries had been hard at work amongst the different tribes of men in the south and east, and he had secured the allegiance of some of them near to Mordor, but these men were not nearly strong or numerous enough to pose a threat to Gil-galad and the Númenóreans. The natural alternative for Sauron was orcs, but there was a problem. During Morgoth's defeat, most of his orcs had been wiped out, and those that survived were now mostly in hiding in the Misty Mountains and the Grey Mountains. While they were again multiplying, and while Sauron had secured their allegiance, they could not come out of hiding until Mordor was completely fortified. While Sauron did fortify Mordor during this time, and presumably brought some of these orcs south, once again, these northern orcs alone would not pose a threat to Gil-galad and the Númenóreans. So where did Sauron get his army from? Well, this is where Tolkien mentions the Eastern Orcs. But further east there were more and stronger kinds, descendants of Morgoth's kingship, but long masterless during his occupation of Thangorodrim. They were yet wild and ungovernable, preying upon one another and upon men, whether good or evil. Basically, these were orcs who once originally served Morgoth, but after the destruction of Utumno and Morgoth's imprisonment, they remained independent as opposed to those who rallied to Sauron at Angband. Unlike their northern cousins, these orcs had become entirely chaotic, uncontrollable and independent. This is reflected in their actions. They constantly attack each other, and they would attack those men in the east, whether they were aligned with darkness or not. Basically, these orcs didn't care. They would attack whoever, whenever, and this had made them strong. These orcs, unlike their northern cousins, had not suffered the destruction of the War of Wrath. They had the numbers, and they had the strength, and Sauron needed that. Funnily enough, when disguised as Annatar, Sauron had actually been amongst them, presumably trying to win their allegiance. But while in this fair form, these orcs despised him and laughed at him. As Tolkien points out, the Eastern Orcs had not experienced the power and terror of the Eldar, nor the valour of the Edain. They had not fallen so low as the Northern Orcs, and were thus not afraid of Sauron and had the self-confidence to reject him. However, when Sauron's disguise is pierced, he no longer has to pretend to be fair. Over the next 90 years, he directs all of his efforts into gathering and training armies, increasing his power base in the south and east. In the end, he goes to war lacking the necessary manpower to win, especially against the Númenóreans. The reason for this is that Sauron's gathering of power in the south and east had some major opponents, namely the Blue Wizards. They ensured that Sauron marched to war with less than what he had hoped for. As for the Eastern Orcs, this seems to have been the end of their independence, as they are never mentioned again. Faced with the rise of a new Dark Lord, their confidence may have melted away, and they submitted. Alternatively, Sauron might have had to subjugate them by force, or he may have simply convinced them to join him, with promises of great loot and spoils to be had from the elven lands in the west. The core of Sauron's army being these powerful Eastern Orcs may explain why Sauron performed so well at the start of the war, sacking Eregion, driving Gil-galad behind the Lune, and occupying most of Eriador. Unfortunately for these Eastern Orcs, if they were the base of Sauron's army, then they would have been pretty much wiped out, as Sauron's forces were almost completely destroyed during the war. Whatever survivors remain probably merged with the other Orcs, and over time, whatever independence they still had would have been strangled out of them. Soon afterwards, they would have been indistinguishable, their time as rampaging independent hordes of Orcs in the east a distant, fading memory. Nevertheless, it's a cool little part of the lore. We're so used to Orcs being the cowardly, weak foot soldiers of the Dark Lords, but these Eastern Orcs, at least for a time, were a powerful force that called no one master. They would have been the boogeymen of the Eastern lands, attacking the weak and primitive men who called those lands their home. They were the true chaotic evil. They did not care if you served Sauron or Morgoth or neither, they would attack you either way. They were proof that much of the weakness of Orcs may have come from their environment. Shackled by the Dark Lords, they became meek and reliant on them. But these ones that got to experience true independence, they became formidable. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed it or at least found it interesting. If you haven't read Nature of Middle-earth, I'd recommend it. If you can get through the parts that are a bit of a slog, as is the nature of the history of Middle-earth or adjacent books, then there are some really cool parts of the lore that you can uncover. Cheers, farewell, and remember, sometimes this last part is genuinely the hardest part of the script to write.